Welcome everybody to the 18th edition of Bend Film. Thanks for all of the members of the audience for sticking around for the QA after the screening with our filmmakers. We have a number of them here. My name is Bradley Parks. I am a science and environment reporter for Oregon Public Broadcasting, based here in Bend. And with me are four of our filmmakers. So we have Rafał Malecki. He's the director of Rust, joining us from Poland. And we have Rachel Bujalski, who is the director of Connected Off the Grid, joining us from the Bay. Oliver Sutro, director of If I Tell Them, he is joining us from Colorado. And then Edward Columbia, director of Little Fish. And I didn't ask Edward where he's joining us from. Where are you joining us from?
Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, New York. Okay. Well, welcome everybody again to Bend Film. We're just going to go ahead and get started with questions. So the first question is one for all of you. So all of these films talk about this connection that we have to the outdoors in some way, shape, or form, the outdoors and nature. And so I'm curious to hear from each of you. What do you think is the importance of highlighting that connection right now? Take your time.
Yeah, well, actually, yesterday with the huge blackout with Facebook and Instagram, it was just so clear that there's so much connecting to online and relying on the internet to connect with one another. And we really need to remember how important it is to connect to nature, because that's where we really are ourselves, our true selves. And yeah, yesterday was a big awakening, and seeing everybody on Twitter, kind of like going back to, another platform to connect. It was just this crazy feeling, and it felt really good to disconnect and not have Instagram yesterday. So yeah, I think it's so important that we connect with nature. It shows us who we really are.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're talking about connecting with nature in a Zoom meeting, which I feel like is representative of our last 2 years. I mean, there's not a lot needed to speak about what can happen when you connect with nature. People open themselves up to each other, people can have good conversations, and I feel like it's pretty obvious, especially right now as we're all staring at each other through a computer screen, not being able to see each other in person, that getting outside with someone who you don't know can be really beneficial for everyone involved.
That's funny, Brad, you asked this question. My character in the film talks about electricity and gas, and when we run out of gas or electricity, we are helpless. We are nothing, we can do anything. And my character is balancing between the civilization and the deep nature when there's really nothing. And that's where she takes all the inspiration for what she does in the movie.
Nice. Wow. This makes me want to see all of your films. I can't wait. I come to this question really from the perspective of food and cooking often. I'm an avid cook, and that's part of the subject of this short documentary. And I guess I'm excited about all of the ways in which people can connect with nature, regardless of what resources they have at their disposal. The subject of this short doc is a really well-regarded chef who lives on a farm. Not everybody lives on a farm, not everyone has that opportunity to do kind of some of the things he's talking about. And yet I think there are touchstones in it that anyone, whether living in an urban center or a rural area or something in between, can be inspired by. So I love the idea that we all need to eat, and that we can look creatively at our surroundings for nourishment. Yeah.
Yeah, Edward, I'll go ahead and jump straight back to you. because there's a lot of emphasis in the story with Chef Boone about slowing down. So that's sort of the whole drive of the film is him stopping service at his very busy commercial kitchen and slowing down to make food for himself and for others. So I'm curious to hear from you. You're living in the hustle and bustle of New York City. Were you able to like take some lessons from that and put that into practice during the course of making this film? And how does that show up, if so?
Yeah. Before making the film, I had worked with Bun as his sous chef. And so when he decided to close his restaurant, Mia's, I was in the kitchen with him, and we worked in the restaurant 3 days a week. And then 4 days a week, we designed the outdoor educational programs that he ultimately pivoted to. And I learned a lot. And, you know, it inspired me to actually create a new garden, both an ornamental garden and a clean vegetable garden here in Brooklyn that I now run. So, you know, I think Bun Lai, the chef and my longtime friend, you know, is definitely involved in that. And he's now continuing to do his thing outside of New Haven. And hopefully in some ways, both of us are sharing this with others now. You know, whether it's considering how to connect to the nature of a really big urban center, or in his case, you know, being in a little more of an hermitage, but not being a hermit, you know, trying to kind of welcome people in from different backgrounds and educate them about, well, actually you can eat this, and well, what about this? What about is such a good way of sort of looking at the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and hard to do so without slowing down. Rachel, you were mentioning just at the very beginning of our conversation about how that thing that we're used to accessing so quickly, the internet, and two of our big homes on the internet, Facebook and Instagram, and that being denied to us. And so I'm very curious about this idea of slowing down and having to search for the gratification rather than just having it handed to us immediately. And so I guess I'm curious, Edward, to hear what people can take away from this film and what lessons we can learn from slowing down.
Okay, well, we all have contradictions. I think we all probably wake up and go to bed with a sense that we haven't maybe lived completely according to our principles. We try. Our principles may be lofty or they may be humble and simple. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, we are unlikely to have exactly lived up to all of them. And so I think in Little Fish, you're encountering a person who's pretty honest about that, and who says, you know, look, I'm teaching health classes to diabetics while having my own sort of cheat days in terms of how I eat. Or, you know, I'm educating people and giving lectures, but I'm still addicted to smoking cigarettes. These are like tensions that this particular character has. And if we can take anything away from it, it's that we don't need to be like chefs or any kind of particular activist to realize that like the only way to align our lives with our principles is to slow down, make sure we're caring about ourselves to some extent, like in his case, cooking food for himself, not just eating on a run and cooking for other people. Make sure that we're caring for ourselves, and that at the end of the day, we can be gentle with ourselves about ways in which like we haven't totally lived up to what we believe in, but we're trying, and maybe we're getting a little bit better, and maybe we're changing one behavior a little bit at a time that means our lives are on a better track. I mean, who doesn't relate to that? Yeah.
Right. And anyone else, feel free to cut me off and jump in. So I'd much rather you all have a conversation amongst yourselves than with me. But just to keep the conversation moving forward, Rachel, in your film, Connected Off the Grid, the first character we're introduced to, Garth, he talks about the long, slow process of creating his home. Where he talks about, he's been working at it for 36 years and still never gratified. Is slowing down sort of something that is important to the people in your film as well?
Totally. Yeah, I think Garth teaches us such a big lesson. And, even at his wise old age, living in this desert, he's still, working at things. And I think that is what life is about. We're constantly working at things, trying to get better. And I think we just have to embrace the process. It's not about hurrying and trying to get to the finish line. It's about slowing down, as Edward is talking about, and just like enjoying it. Like, we're on a journey. Life is not just, we're done. Like, we need to really suffer sometimes and talk about it and share the hard, painful processes that it takes. And like making a film too, like all of us, it wasn't easy what we did. It's a long process, and it wasn't done in just a second, like an Instagram post. So yeah, I think Garth really speaks to that, living in the desert and living this slower life that he is living. But he's enjoying it, visiting with him, and all the people that come out to visit him from all around the world get a little taste of what it means to slow down, and they take, that away from him. And that's what he wanted. He wanted to create this space so that people can come and learn that from him.
Yeah, let's talk about that process a little bit, because the whole basis of the film is people who are off the grid and I would imagine not very reachable. How did you find these people, and how did you narrow down who you were going to focus on for this project?
Yeah, so the whole idea of this film came because I was living, this fast-paced life. As we all do, like just connecting. I was like, obsessed with Instagram. And I was like, you know what? I want to try something a little bit different. I was living in Los Angeles in this apartment with a bunch of different girls. And I was like, I'm going to go live in the marina on a sailboat and just see what happens. And so I live on this sailboat, and I feel like more connected to myself, and life just felt a little slower. But I was also, as a photographer and filmmaker, I'm like, well, who else is living this way? And my curiosity kind of was like, well, let's go explore. And so I got in my car for 3 months and lived out of my car and started finding people. And through that process of connecting with myself, slowing down, and really having these intimate, deep conversations with other people living off grid, I found Garth, and I found Carbohydrate, and I found Melanie and Bo. And so, from the desert off grid to the redwoods, and then to the marina. And so I was kind of following people that were doing what I was doing, but obviously in a way deeper level. And for a long time, they committed their lives to slowing down, and I learned from them. So yeah, I found them on my own journey of wanting to slow down.
Yeah, and connected is the operative word here, because I have a sense of what connected means when I hear it, and there's the very tangible connection of things touching, and then there's being connected to the internet. That's another way of being connected. What do you think connection is in this sense? What are these people connecting to? Do you think in this film?
Yeah, I think, their families, their friends, themselves, like what they care about. So if you see the film, each person cares so deeply about what they're doing. Like Carbohydrate, he wants to save these trees. He's so passionate about it. And he's finding like really who he is as a person in that process. And then Garth too, he's so connected to what he cares about. And that's, inviting people in to come see and share this experience of what he's created. And then Melanie and Bo is like, they're so connected to each other as a family. The parents are wanting to teach the children how to grow up without being so reliant on the internet. And so I think their passions really show through.
And Rafael, let's turn to you. Similar question to Rachel, how are you able to find your way to your main character? And what about her story made you want to tell it?
Yes, my character, she's an artist. Her name is Mariola Wawrzusiak, and she's a famous Polish sculptor, actually. And I just happen to know her, and that's why I made this film, because I was kind of fascinated by what she does in life. She's an artist, but very specific. What she does is collecting scrap metal to weld sculpture, to weld animals. And it's a very crazy idea to make animals alive again. And it's made of the remnants of the human civilization. And so I was so much fascinated by this process that I started to just observe her on a daily basis. And after some time, we get to the point we have a film about her.
Yeah, and that very opening scene, she is in a big pile of scrap metal, which, people's discarded things. What do you think following her and making this film taught you about our relationship to those physical objects?
This is very funny because this film is about how many things we leave behind. And before I start shooting, I had no idea there is so much metal all over. And we visited so many scrapyards, so many strange objects that you couldn't even believe. And it's funny that she explores this kind of areas everywhere in the world. She travels a lot, and she starts visiting scrap yards before visiting tourist attractions. And it's funny, everywhere is the same. There are tons of metal, tons of rubbish everywhere. And that was an eye-opener to me, actually. I had no idea. And I think what she talks about, the message that art is kind of a sign left for the future generation. And her observation is that the human civilization nowadays leaves just rubbish, destroying all the things around and the nature. So that's the story.
I'm curious to know if there was a specific object that you found during the course of this that sort of remained with you, that you always think to, maybe the strangest thing or the most interesting thing that you found throughout the course of this.
It's very funny. You can find whatsoever what you really imagine. For instance, we have found a hammer, which became a beak of a bird, for instance. And so it's like a exercise for the imagination. How to turn it back to the nature, And there were so many strange things, chains are for instance, very good for spines in animals and all kinds of different, very strange looking objects. You don't even know what it was before, you know. They very often can form a very natural kind of part of an animal. So it's like a puzzle, you know.
So cool. I love that.
Yeah, I can show you something. Look, I'm not sure if it's visible. These are wolves. It looks like.
Wow.
So
Amazing.
it could be anything, you know. She's so active. She makes a lot of birds, mammals, whatsoever, really. And these animals also have this specific kind of attitude, kind of fear in the face. Fear, like those monkeys in Indonesia, you know, afraid of deforestation, you know what I mean? This kind of how to call it, when you have to face the human, when you are an animal, you've got to face the threat. And it's very interesting. So that's something which really helped me to make a very visual film and not quite realistic. It's like not real, you know.
Oliver, I want to turn to you. I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe your film takes place right here in Oregon on the Rogue River. Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how you met your character or the family that you follow, and how you got to know them.
I mean, making a film, as you all know, is extremely difficult, whether that's not having any funding or it taking an immense amount of time. And I think anyone who's edited a film knows how much emotional fatigue and trauma you go through. So you kind of have to play to your strengths when you make something. It seems like all of you talking about your films, what you made something that is close to what you do or where you live, and you've been eyeing a character for a long time or whatever it may be. The same case goes for me and James, the main character in my film. I'm really into fishing. I spent a long time in the Southern Oregon coast fishing for steelhead, and I spent a good deal of my life or trying to paint. And then aside from that, it seemed like all of the shoots that I went on for commercial shoots, there would be, when you're sitting in a boat with someone shooting fly fishing or any sort of fishing, it's people tend to open up. There's no one around, and you hear what people are going through that they wouldn't normally tell you in their house or anywhere else. And you find that more people than you know are struggling with being diagnosed with bipolar or depression or whatever it may be. So there was a long time that I was thinking about making a film about one of these people that I've met in a boat or out on the water somewhere. And James just kind of flopped into my life serendipitously. But like all of you, it's not so serendipitous. It's what you do. It's where you live. So that's how he came about. And he was the first person who I thought might be willing to open up about the struggles with manic depressive fits and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, and he says at one point in the film, and I want to make sure that I get it right. He's talking about hanging out with a child, and he says if you hang around a child long enough, eventually they'll open up and show you their world. And I'm a reporter. I talk to a lot of people. I find the same is true for a lot of people. I guess how were you able to get James and his family to open up about their world? Because they're talking about some pretty, tightly held things. And this could be a question that everyone jumps in on at the end too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably true with anyone. You have to spend time and it takes a lot of trust. It's hard for someone who is willing to speak to a camera about the deepest, darkest parts of their life. It's hard for someone to talk to a camera about the best parts of their life. You sort of freeze up, you forget what you're saying. So it takes an immense amount of trust and immense amount of time without a camera before you can show up and expect someone to be themselves. And James was more than willing from the beginning to, bear all. And he would say to me, there's nothing I'm not willing to share with you. But in reality, it took over a month of us spending time together or between the shoots to get comfortable where he could deliver the final bit of interview that was crucial to the making of the film. So it's a little bit complex, but it all comes down to time and trust, I think.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And then opening up yourself. Like, I feel like there's so much of like me that I end up sharing that I don't expect to, and me being super vulnerable to get people to open up, because I don't expect someone to open up to me if I don't open up to them. I think it's a back and forth.
For me, it was easier in a way. We know each other first of all, but on the other hand, if I was the admirer of her artwork, which kind of opens her up a little bit more maybe than normal, because every artist wants to be admired in a way. And on the other hand, it's of course it's time you've got to invest in this relation and a lot of trust. And I was lucky because my main character, just ignored the camera. She didn't give a shit about
That's very lucky.
So that was really lucky.
What about you, Edward? Anything to add on that? I know you've spent a lot of time with your main with your main character just as friends.
Yeah, I mean, I was living with Bun for the summer and from midsummer into part of the fall of 2020, and learning from him in the kitchen, trying to be helpful both in and out of the restaurant. Ultimately, the film maybe had a very different process than the three of you did. I took that in, and then we ended up filming with a particular structure in mind. It wasn't just we didn't follow Bun around. I took in the experience that I had thanks to him, and then kind of came back to him with some ideas, and we discussed it, and we ultimately shot this short in a very particular way. And all three of you might have thoughts on that, and including critical thoughts, because I didn't kind of camp there and film a ton of footage. It was more that I had a lot of experience, none of which was captured, working in a totally different, very practical capacity that was not as a filmmaker. And then we made this film, and we shot it on film stock with him in a very particular way in a relatively short period of time. So I would guess that is quite different from what the three of you did. It has its own, it has its pros and cons, I imagine. That just seemed like the best fit for this story. So.
Well, differences in all, you all have made some really beautiful stories here and shared some really great stories. And so I want to thank you for that, and for joining us here in this QA. Before we wrap up, I do want to hear where you're going to be investing that time and that skill and expertise of yours next. So we can start with Rafael. What's in the works for you?
I want to jump into fiction a little bit, and I'm going to shoot a small short on the Canary Islands. That's my plan. I will not tell you much, but it's going to be like Robinson Crusoe kind of story.
Cool.
Oliver.
In the 1980s and 1990s, fishing shows in tropical destinations like the Florida Keys started to become prominent. And I'm big in the fishing world, and I find them super hilarious, just the way that people dress up and watching them with all their retro gear and all the format of it. So I recently this spring shot a retro fishing TV show, but the premise is this guy is going out to make a TV show of his own, but the side story is he's actually going to find his long lost father, who was a legend in the area, or a supposed legend. So it's all shot on it's supposed to be late 80s, early 90s, shot on a DV cam, and then with a real cinema camera shooting. So it'll be a funny one. That's where really my passions lie, comedy.
Edward, how about
I'm already curious about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Both of those. Currently writing a novel-length story about 3 kids who live in a post-industrial city in Massachusetts, and find themselves living very much by their wits for an intense short period of time along the Merrimack River. And the story has to do with the proximity of nature to urban development. So on the one hand, they're in a highly urbanized environment, and on the other, they are still living along a river. And and in the case of the youngest kid, there's a lot of magic to that, and he's very enamored of the nature in a way that a lot of the older people can't appreciate. And so writing that in prose, going to adapt it to a screenplay form as well, and then also working on a nonfiction piece about a chef who is devoted to like going out and meeting the elders in her country and trying to celebrate recipes that have been all but lost due to a period of war. So though not one's fictional, one's nonfiction, both very engaging projects for me. Yeah.
Rachel, what are you working on?
Yeah, so I am working on building my big photo portfolio crisis that I've been covering for the past 10 years, and writing a National Geographic grant to get more funding to keep photographing and making films about this topic. So yeah, covering a broad spectrum of homelessness, the aftermath of the fires here in California and Oregon. Yeah, so many evictions, a lot of different topics under housing.
Well, once again, I want to thank you all for slowing down and taking some time with us indoors today. Hopefully you're all able to get outdoors here. So I know here in Oregon, where the snow season is upon us. So thank you all so much, and excellent work. And hopefully we'll all get to talk again soon.
Thank you, Bradley.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bradley.
Bye.
Thank you all.
It was nice meeting you. I hope we get to meet in person one day.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Good luck with all your projects.
Yeah.
Likewise.